Hello and welcome to The Ripple Impact, the podcast where we go beneath the surface to uncover the powerful moment that changed everything. Before we begin today's episode, I want to give you, our listeners, a little gentle note of care that today's conversation includes themes of trauma, grief, loss, mental health, including murder and suicide. So please take care as you listen today. These are important stories shared with care, but please take the space that you need if this feels too heavy today. And of course, feel free to skip this episode if you need to. So let's begin. Today's guest brings a beautiful balance and blend of heart, clarity, and courage. Nina Purewal's story from unexpected childhood tragedy is one of trauma and pain, but she has turned that pain into purpose. After climbing the corporate ladder in sales and marketing, she's now dedicated herself to mindfulness, mental health, and healing. She founded Pure Minds Inc., a social enterprise that conducts wellness workshops for the corporate sector with over 60 clients. She's the co-author of international bestselling book, Let That Sht Go, which offers practical, no-nonsense strategies and tips for coping with racing thoughts, imposter syndrome, digital overwhelm, and embracing authenticity. She's also executive grief ambassador for the Season Centre for Grieving Children. She's a sought-after speaker and someone who's helping reshape how we think about success, resilience, and well-being in work and life. And it's an absolute honour, Nina, to have you on the show today. I'm so happy to have you here, so welcome.
Thank you, Laura. Such an honor to be here. Thank you for all the work that you do and creating this ripple effect for others out there who are seeking some inspiration.
Thank you. I'm so honoured that you're here today. So we actually first met when I was at PepsiCo, right? And you came in to do a mindful workshop with us, and your story and your work that you're doing and your presence has stayed with me since then. So I'm really honoured that you get to share your story with us today with our listeners.
Thank you. I can't believe you remember that from all those years ago, but I'm honored that you did and happy to be here.
Of course. And I'm sure everyone listening today will remember this story because it's one that is deeply difficult, but has such powerful lessons of quiet, steady strength and reminds us that healing is possible even in the darkest of moments. So thank you for sharing your story and being so vulnerable with us and with the world. You have been so open about your story, your family loss and grief, and that's taken you down the wellness path that you're in today. Can you share and talk our listeners through your story and what brought you to be here today?
Absolutely. And again, thank you for the platform here. I started my journey to wellness and spirituality, if you will, and wanting to know the meaning of life quite young when I was 16. And this was in the 90s when wellness and mental health wasn't as much of a topic. I unfortunately went through quite a severe tragedy at that time. My parents were going through a significant separation. My dad was quite abusive emotionally, psychologically throughout their 22-year marriage. And my mom decided it was time to leave, which was quite a taboo thing to do at the time, especially coming from Indian culture. She served him with divorce papers, and 6 months post that, he decided to take his own life and also take my brother's. So I lost both my dad and my brother to a murder-suicide at 16. I found out from the detectives that the plan was to take me as well. So I am just grateful to be alive, grateful to be here, and have gone through a lot of trauma, survivor's guilt, PTSD, have been in and out of therapy since I was 16. I think it's just such a wonderful tool. And from there, worked the corporate sector and had a great career in sales and marketing, but also parallel path, wellness and healing to get me to where I am today.
Yeah. Wow. How do you even begin on that journey with such tragedy and such loss? How do you even take the first step? Because I can't even begin to imagine what that was even like.
I didn't know what to do. It was the 90s and we didn't have the support system that we have now. And so I immediately saw a child psychologist, and my mom was very intentional about making sure I got the help I needed. I had a very supportive network of friends, and even at school, the teachers were great, the guidance counselors. I went to the Season Centre for Grieving Children, which is where I'm an executive ambassador now. And that was quite a game changer because suddenly I was in a group of peer-to-peer support of other teenagers who had gone through the same thing, because grief can be incredibly isolating, especially as a child. Everyone in the high school was talking about their boyfriends and their girlfriends and where they wanted to go to college or university. And I was doing the same, but in the back of my mind, I was processing so much. It was quite numbing. And to be honest, I didn't deal with it well. I repressed for a good decade and a half. I had a great career in sales and marketing. And then in 2010, about a decade into my career, I kind of hit a peak point of stress sparked by the corporate grind. And I told myself, there's more to life than this. I'm yearning for more. I want to learn more about ancient wisdom. And so I took a year sabbatical and I moved to Northern California and lived in the redwoods for a year in a monastery or an ashram and learned more about these truths. When you unplug and you have no distractions, and this happened to a lot of people in the pandemic, suddenly the stuff starts coming up because we can't go to the gym or talk, interact as much, or we're not going to work. And suddenly in the quiet, everything you've been repressing and suppressing starts to surface. And that's exactly what happened in that year. I mean, I learned a lot about ancient wisdom and how to manage stress and anxiety and whatnot. But in the quiet, I was like, wow, I really haven't dealt with this. And shortly after that, I lost my mom to ALS. And that's when all the grief started coming back up. Because at this point now, I've lost my entire nuclear family. And I realized, the only way to move through this pain was to forgive my dad, because I was holding on to so much anger and resentment. And this is why I do workshops on forgiveness as well, because when we are hurting and we feel a certain way, that anger and resentment towards someone, they're not feeling it. We're feeling it.
Yeah.
So I had kind of this epiphany moment of, he's dead and gone, but I'm the one that's taking on all this. So how do I move through this? And from there, I went on a 2-year journey to forgive. Again, it's not black and white, but I've come a long way in the last 27 years around my anger and resentment towards that. That's how I move through things, obviously in and out of all therapy, grief therapy, trauma healing, somatic healing. There's just so many different levers that we can lean into now. And I think that's a really important part of the path, because when you lean into self, that's powerful and empowering, but to get the tools and the toolkit that we need to catapult out of the grief and out of the story that we create for ourselves, and again, turn that pain into purpose.
Yeah. And how you build that support system around yourself as well, to have the people there that you can lean on when you need to as well.
That's critical, to have a good community and network of people who can hold space for your grief and loss.
Yeah, it's interesting you call it holding space, because I think sometimes in these difficult times, people want to help, don't they? They want to solve, they want to fix, and actually holding space isn't really that, is it? It's been there, it's been present, it's listening, it's maybe just letting them cry, or just mind-numbingly watching TV together, in that kind of camaraderie of support.
Right. And kind of putting it back on that person to say, how can I support you? How can I be here? What do you need from me? And I'm so blessed to have the network that I have professionally and personally with the support that I've gotten.
Yeah. Wow. And to turn such tragedy into purpose is so commendable and so incredible. And I'm sure there's a lot of people listening going, just wow, what you've achieved and what you've done and how you've turned that into fuel and energy and drive is absolutely commendable and is awe-inspiring. So I'm sure everybody's feeling that who's listening to this right now, because I certainly did when I first heard the story, and I feel it all over again when you tell the story now. So thank you, because it's inspiring.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And someone said to me, we have a drawer, right? We can only put so much into that drawer. And so much of my drawer was filled with that loss and that sadness and that anger. And so when I moved through that, and it's not, again, linear, I made space. And it's incredible what started to fall into place once I started healing. The book deal came through, I started my business, and suddenly you're not defined by your trauma or your story. You use it as a tool for empowerment for yourself. And that is my ultimate mission, is to give people hope through adversity.
And what was the tipping point from, obviously you had a successful marketing and sales career, doing incredible things, working in some big organizations. What was the moment when you were like, I have to do this? More than this. Was there a thing? Was there a moment? Was there a time?
That's a great question. And I would say I always felt that way. I was that person in corporate who had positive quotes, all around my desk. I always had this yearning to share. And when I came back from the ashram, it was 100-fold. I was like, I need to share this because there is so much great practical tools in ancient wisdom that we can apply to how we deal with stress and anxiety, how we step into our authentic self, how we navigate imposter syndrome. There's just so much richness there. And I came back in 2011 knowing this is something I wanted to do, but the world world wasn't ready, if you will. People were talking about yoga and that was kind of the spiritual thing at the time. We weren't talking about mindfulness in the workspace or even mental health in the workspace. I kind of always knew this was the path. I just didn't know how it was going to unfold. And sometimes that's the thing. We have to plant the seed and keep watering it and giving it sunlight. And I came back and worked startup for a couple of years for an environmental company because I made the shift of, I loved marketing. I loved sales. I enjoyed my corporate career, but I wanted to do something more purpose driven. I was always put on the corporate social responsibility tasks of launching fair trade chocolate or, because that was where my natural passion was. So I worked in startup for a while. And then in 2017, I decided to give it a shot. And I thought, I'll try it for a year. I always have corporate to go back to if it doesn't work. And those are the big risks we take. That was in 2017 and I haven't looked back since. Here we are, as you mentioned, 60 clients later and a book. And sometimes we have to just jump in and do the thing. So it's something I always knew I wanted to do. I just didn't know how it was going to manifest. And sometimes I still don't know how things are going to continue. And that's part of being an entrepreneur is you have your purpose and you have your why, and then you kind of put it out there and see how things unfold. So it's something I always knew, but actually took the leap in 2017.
And how did you actually take the leap? What did that look like? So anyone that's on the edge and the precipice of change going, I want to do this. I want to do what Nina's done. I have such a purpose and a drive and a meaning that I want to put out in the world. How would you advise people kind of to take that leap?
Yeah, that's a great question. You have to just do the thing. If you jump from corporate to entrepreneurship, there is a practical side, right? So maybe it needs to start as a side hustle because you have a family and you've got to put food on the table. For me, it started off very, very small. My co-author and I were doing workshops in the city of Toronto at the Drake Hotel on mindfulness and meditation. And she actually founded a company where she offered a bunch of workshops in wellness. And she asked me to teach the mindfulness and meditation one. And she had this brilliant idea because at the time swearing was a big thing. So she had this idea of putting swearing on all her workshops, which was brilliant. So we had mindful AF and we had learn how to F and meditate, which was a struggle for me coming from an ashram too, right? So I went through my own journey with that, but they ended up going viral. And I didn't even have a website or a company at the time. I just more and more got into the feeling of this feels right. This feels aligned. This feels exactly what I want to do. But then there's the whole piece of how do I actually turn this into a business? And someone in one of those workshops said, hey, would you be willing to do this for my company? And I thought, yeah, I actually would. So I went home and I registered a company name and I built a bare bones website in a couple days and I just jumped in. And it was kind of just one client. I mean, my first website had like 2 company logos in like 60 size font, and that's where you start. And one thing kind of builds off another. And I'm grateful for my time in corporate because it taught me so much about entrepreneurship, but my network, I would say 80% of my revenue is from my network and just people at the time who thought it was completely off the rocker for taking a sabbatical and going to California and living in a monastery for a year. Now they were calling me up going, can you teach my team about everything you learned? And it's just built from there. If I can give any advice, it's focusing on your why and your purpose and letting it unfold. Of course, you have to practically plan if you want to do corporate workshops or you want to do a podcast, but sometimes things kind of click and fall into place. I'm 8 years in now and failed at certain projects and certain things along the way. And you learn, you just never know how things are going to unfold and you never know how the world is going to unfold and what's needed from a society as well. So you go on the journey and slowly, the more you lean into that purpose and that passion, the more it just manifests. And I was talking to another entrepreneur and she said to me, how do you just know everything's going to work out? And I said, well, I don't. You hustle. And then and then I kind of trust. And she looked back at me and she said, hustle and trust. And I said, hustle and trust. And then she sent me a t-shirt.
I was going to say, we should have that on a t-shirt.
Exactly. Name's Tarila Malone. She's Marone. She's on my team. She's wonderful. But that's just it. You kind of have to hustle and see what sticks there. But there's also from an entrepreneurship perspective, because you're not getting that paycheck every 2 weeks, you have to trust that that things are going to unfold and practically take care of yourself. There's a lot, I should say, of unknowns and uncertainty along the way.
Yeah. I love though the going with your passion and going with the energy and hustling and going where the flow is. I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, we have such a strong sense of intuition. Like our greatest compass is our internal intuition.
Yeah.
But we are so focused on the external validation and what other people are doing and the comparison game, especially with social media and the scrolling, that we forget to go inwards and ask ourselves, what is it that we want? The more we lean into that, the more successful we can be, because that's our truth and that's what we're meant to do. So the more we identify with that, the more the universe provides.
Yeah, interesting. And you talk about a lot about this in your book as well, the self-love piece. One of the things that always sticks in my mind of what you talked about when you came in and spoke to us was this idea of self-smack and self-love, which I remember at the time going, wow, like, yeah, because we are so critical of ourselves and the self-narrative can be so negative sometimes. And you had incredible stats around the amount of thoughts that are in your mind in any given day and the amount of thoughts that are actually negative. I can't remember the stats. You probably can remember them, but I remember just being blown away.
Yeah, so we think on average 60,000 thoughts a day.
Wow.
Which is 35 to 42 thoughts a minute. Okay, so our minds are constantly going. And again, studies suggest we're aware of less than 1% of them. And I just,
Wild.
wild. And I read something recently that said 95% of our thoughts are just a repeat from the day before, right?
Really? Wow.
So how do we interrupt this and become aware of the thought patterns that are serving us and the thought patterns that are not? It's the job of the mind to create doubt, and it's just natural. It's not the fault of anyone. It's just how the mind works. These studies suggest that 80% of our thoughts are negative or self-deprecating. And so when I talk about self-love, yes, it's so important to do practical things around self-love, like go to the spa or spend a day golfing or take a vacation or just unplug and take a time out. But for me, self-love starts with what is going on in here. And really that's imposter syndrome.
I was going to say that it feels like that's the fuel for the imposter syndrome, right? It's this negative narrative that you tell yourself on a daily basis.
Exactly. The New Yorker just said it. It's ubiquitous. Everybody's feeling the imposter, especially with the pressures of society and the pressures we put on ourselves. And we need to start to flip the script. In order to do that, we need to understand what are those thoughts. And this is not a fun process. This is work. That's why they say the work. You see all these memes of therapy, right? And people think it's like flowers and rainbows, and it's not. You have to go before you start to see the light. So the challenging work is to really understand what are our negative thoughts, negative, I'll say in quotes, but what are our self-deprecating thoughts? In my workshops, I actually have people list them out. And from there, you analyze them and understand them. And what's really interesting is so many of these thoughts that we have are not our faults. They're our responsibility because we're now adults, but they start in childhood from something a parent or a sibling or a teacher or a bad coach. Someone started to say things to us and suddenly we believe them. And we started to build these records of I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy of this. And before we know it, we're fully functioning adults and we have a very skewed self-perception. And when people write out their negative thoughts, one of the first things I say is, imagine showing this to someone who unconditionally loves you. Would they be like, oh yeah, that's bang on. That's you, Laura.
They've got to be mortified, wouldn't they? Don't say that to yourself.
Exactly. So we need to start talking to ourselves as we would our best friend or our partners or someone we love or our little selves, our inner child, right? And I go through a whole process of how to take each thought and rework it. But the key in that is awareness. And that's why it's the first chapter of the book. How do we become more aware of what's going on in there and the dialogue that we're constantly feeding ourselves that's not working for us?
Yeah. And then how do you reframe it so that you can start telling yourself the positive version? Because that self-narrative talks at you, doesn't it? I saw a thing the other week which was like, name the voice. So you can go, not now so-and-so. I don't say a name in case someone's listening who has that name, but not now so-and-so. Like that's not helping. And almost talking to that voice, to challenge that voice, to say, no, like that's not true. You can do this. You've got this. You are enough.
Exactly. That's precisely what we do, is to build awareness. We become aware of the thoughts. And then it's almost like we're having a conversation with ourselves, which I had a meditation teacher said that there's only one person you're going to live the rest of your life with, and that's you. To have those conversations and to get really intimate with those thoughts is what catapults you to change, because suddenly you start changing the narrative. And I have to say, this is science. This is neuroplasticity. There are so many studies and neurologists that have gotten behind this now. I mean, I got into this in the 90s, but now there's a woman by the name of Sarah Lazar. She's associated with Harvard Medical School. She's done MRI scans of the brain to show how, mindfulness and meditation practices actually change the structure of your brain. It changes your amygdala, it changes your prefrontal cortex, it thickens it. Amygdala is associated with fight or flight, stress, anxiety, and prefrontal cortex associated with concentration, focus, decision making. So there's a lot of science behind it. So we need to get intimate with these thoughts. And with the imposter syndrome thoughts, I actually have people write down, let's say the thought is, I'm not good at my job. So then we go through a process of, let's pretend we're in a court of law and we're building a defense case against why this is not true. Well, I got hired and I work for one of the best beverage companies in the world. I just got a promotion. I just got kudos from my manager. I've made it this far in my career. And then we come up with a replacement thought. I'm actually pretty good at my job, and the intent is not to make us feel like we don't want to have crazy egos and whatnot, but we see ourselves so much more negatively or poorly than other people see us. So it's just to get us back to a place of like, no, we can do the thing, but it's a process and it takes time. But awareness is key. I always say awareness is half the battle, because if you can catch it, then you can move through it. And I do tell people to give their chatty minds, as I call it, a name. Give it a name. So you identify with it as a separate almost entity, because a lot of us who struggle with anxiety or depression, we think we are our thoughts, but we're so much more than our thoughts. So it's getting back to that core and giving the negative thoughts almost an identity to be like, no, we're not going to do this today.
It's interesting because you say we're not our thoughts, but also sometimes your negative thoughts is things that you've been told by someone else. And it's almost like you're becoming the negative comments from someone else that maybe their opinion doesn't even matter.
100%.
And you're telling yourself that, and you're almost becoming what they're telling you, which is crazy.
Yeah, because I also do one-on-one coaching in the corporate sector. And sometimes people can actually identify that voice as they're a narcissistic parent. That's why I have people identify the phrases, because it's the same things we say to ourselves. It's the same insecurities that come up. And sometimes they can actually hear the person who constantly said that to them. So it's this process of undoing, going back to self and our potential versus these comments that were said to us. For those of us who grew up in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, it's like mental health wasn't really talked about.
It wasn't a thing.
It wasn't really a thing. So people say whatever to us and we internalized it and we didn't really talk about our emotions. So now that it's all coming out, it's like, wow, that voice was really powerful and it impacted me this way. Again, not our faults, but our responsibility now. So how do we move through it?
And you talk about moving from a chatty mind to an observing mind. Like what are the practical tools to do that? How do you start on that journey to actually observe rather than go into the thoughts and fester around in there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's why I wanted to do what I do, because I think there's so much great richness in ancient wisdom, but how do we make it practical, right? How do we actually shift our minds? And so in the book, in the first chapter, awareness is the first chapter, and we talk about the mind as having two parts. So bear with me here because it's a little bit out of the box.
No, I love it.
But we have the chatty mind, as you said, and this is the mind we are so associated with thinking these 60,000 thoughts per se, and 80% of them are negative. And we're just going along with this chatty mind and we're living like this day to day. And again, the 95% thoughts of the repetition. What we have to do is to lean into what we call the observing mind, or in ancient wisdom, they call it the witness. It is simply observing what the chatty mind is doing. And the observing mind doesn't try to solve for what you're thinking about. It doesn't try to judge you for thinking those thoughts. It just simply observes and can say, hey, Nina, you're at work and you're thinking about home, or you're trying to enjoy time with your friends and you are stressing about this client. And so it just makes you a lot more tuned in and aware of the mind. And it is a practice. When you first start practicing, you might notice you're doing it maybe once a week and then suddenly once a day. And then suddenly you're so tuned in that every time that chatty mind comes up, you can be aware of it and you can say, not right now. I have to preface by saying we don't want to repress and suppress like I did. If thoughts of trauma and whatnot, please make sure you're healing and doing the work in that sense and you're not pushing. It's just those little naggy thoughts that prevent you from showing up. And I remember my last corporate job, I had a sticky note that I wrote in capital letters and put on my laptop that said, get yourself out of the way. Because, as you write the email, what's so-and-so going to think about this? And how am I going to come off? And then you spend half an hour writing an email that could have taken 5 minutes because you're so in your head about things. And so this awareness of the mind is how we build this process of observing versus chatty mind. And that's why I say, give that mind, the chatty mind, a name and treat it like a toddler. Treat your chatty mind like a little child going into all of these different directions. And we have such little control over our minds. We don't even know the next thought we're going to think. And the process of mindfulness goes from the mind having control over you to you having a little more control over your mind, or at least being aware. Just because you become aware of the pattern, it's not going to go away tomorrow. Like I still have thoughts of trauma that pop up and whatnot, but it's good to be intimate with it because then you know what's going on. Because again, we live in such a distracted society where we sometimes avoid the work. So when we're in tune, we're like, oh, this is coming up for me. And I had no idea it was still a thing in my subconscious. And it becomes a really, really powerful and empowering tool.
Yeah. It's interesting because when you were first talking about it, you were doing this and talking about this. Is there an element of almost going above your thoughts and observing your thoughts? Because when you were doing that, I was like, well, that's really interesting that you're doing this. Like, it almost feels like you observe them rather than being in it. Is that fair?
No, you're bang on. One of the monks said to me once, always try to be in the eye of the hurricane. So a hurricane, that this is our thoughts and we're spinning. And he said, in the center of the hurricane is a 10 to 20 kilometer radius of stillness. And if we can be in that stillness and just observe versus getting enthralled, that's the place we want to be. And this all goes back to the concept of our true nature is happiness, is love, is joy. If you look at infants or toddlers, they're inherently happy. They're happy to see a blade of grass or to eat a cookie or, to play a game. They're just inherently happy. They get upset for practical reasons if they're tired or they're hungry. So what happened along the way, right? When we were 5 or 6, those comments started. So when people say, oh, I'm on a journey to find happiness, I always say it's not a journey. It's there. It's here. And Eckhart Tolle or all these wonderful people who've brought this wisdom to the forefront talk about how that's our true nature. We just need to get back to that. Hence the letting shit go. What we need to do is let go of all the things that are in the way of accessing that happiness and the observing of thought. Yes, it's kind of like you kind of step outside and you're observing versus you are the thought. Because again, so many of our thoughts are not working for us. They're working against us.
Yeah, wow. Life and work lessons, because these comments and this narrative can hold people back in so many different ways. And if we can let go of some of that shit, then allow ourselves to be free and to live it and be authentic and be present and lean in and bring your full self. The freeing nature of that must be so powerful for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a continuous journey, but it is empowering for people because suddenly they realize there's so much more to them than who they thought they were. I was defined by my story for so long. I was the murder suicide girl. And in high school, to no one's fault, I just felt like it was written on my forehead. As I went through life and healed more, I thought there's more to me than this. And that's the empowerment that it provides.
You must have done so many different corporate workshops, from finance to beverages to different organizations. Has there been any standout little ripple moments of either conversations, things that people said, or things you've observed over those 60 clients and hundreds of sessions?
Yeah, there's a lot. And it's such fulfilling work. I also do one-on-one coaching, and that's when I can go really, really deep with people. But for me, it's the aha moments. That's worth anything more than the monetary stuff, is when people suddenly say, wow, I've been trying to unlock that for 10 years. Or I do workshops on authenticity too. Letting go of the shoulds, the power of saying no, stepping into yourself, even if it means you're swimming upstream or you're going against the grain. There is only one of you. And it sounds cheesy, but there is only one magical you. And there is only one you that has a purpose. The aha moments that I see, and obviously a lot of them are confidential because people come in and share with me, but it's wonderful to see the relief that happens when we can shift. We don't have to stay this way. We don't have to stay in these patterns. And not to mention in the corporate sector, the camaraderie that happens. I find, especially if leaders share, it does create a ripple effect of teams being able to feel more human. And that's my goal. I always go into corporations and say, hey, my goal here is let's take the walls down. And suddenly you have a VP getting emotional about something something they're going through. And then suddenly there's this trickle effect to the team of like, oh, wow. Because we tend to pedestalize leaders sometimes, right? And it's like, we're all human. Everyone's going through their stuff. And so then everyone else starts to share. And then we start showing up at work differently. There's so much more space, as we talked about. There's so much more authenticity. We can show up as who we are. We don't have to feel like we have to conform. I mean, when I started in the corporate sector in 2003, you walk through the office door and you put that smile on your face and you did your thing and nobody knew what else was going on, and then but in the pandemic, we all brought work home. And now it's only natural that we bring home into work. And now vulnerable leadership, empathetic leadership, authentic leadership, they're all at the forefront. And that's just at the end of the day, understanding that we're all human. We're not robots. And it creates such a positive space and it motivates people to feel like they're psychologically safe in the environment that they work in.
And there's so much power and strength in vulnerability, isn't there? From whether that's bonding or whether that's giving license to your team or whether that's just being a little bit more human to allow other people to be more human. As you said, walk into the office and put the smile on before you even get out of the house, you put the suit on and we can bring more of ourselves into our lives and our work. Then I think the ripple impact of that is just so positive and it's felt by others and it gives them permission to do that too. This is a really silly example, but I never wear black and white. It's all very boring. I've always been very colourful in how I dress and I never used to be very confident doing that. And then I started doing it. And then slowly I started noticing like other people in the office starting to do it. And slowly you'd start to see little things creeping in, like people just slowly bringing their self into work. And it sounds like a silly thing with just colors. If people can like bring their authenticity into work and be them, like how powerful is that? That they're not worrying about anything else. They're just being them.
Exactly. I love that. And I the same too. I used to have a black and a few years ago was like, no more black. So that's incredible. Whether it was through something intentional that they did or just through osmosis of seeing you, I was going to love your top today. There is this strong ripple effect. And especially with, wellness and mental health, people are yearning. We're hurting as a society today. We're in a mental health crisis. I know in Canada, depression is increased, anxiety's increased, youth suicide rates have doubled. Like it's a really intense time. And if you just keep going and going at work and repressing, you're going to hit burnout. You're going to hit a point of burnout. And so we want to be preventative about that. One thing I hear from my clients is that it just creates a common language. So a leader can say, how's your chatty mind today? How many dead thoughts are you having? All these concepts that I talk about in corporate. And it's really great to see because it just creates a platform of openness and genuine care, and watch how that impacts focus and efficiency and camaraderie and uplifts the team. And suddenly people want to work for these leaders and companies. And when I did leadership training, the one quote that stuck with me was, your manager is the lens through which you view the organization. So that's why, I do leader and executive workshops because they're the ones that are impacting the culture, if you will. It's harder to impact bottom up. I'm not saying you can't. And Gen Z is coming in hot, showing up with authenticity. I always ask, what's the demographic before I do an authenticity workshop? Because if it's a bunch of Gen Zs, it's like they can come teach it with me. They are showing up unapologetically. It's just really great to see the culture shift, especially if there's corporations that I've worked with or teams I've worked with for years going in and doing workshops. It's really, really fulfilling. And it's great to see how people are individually are showing up to work differently. It's almost like they're way more comfortable in their own skin and being who they are. It's a gift for me seeing it, and it's a gift for all of us who can step into who we are.
Yeah. And anyone that isn't lucky enough to have an organization that's bringing you in to run a workshop like I had the beautiful benefit of, and I've still got all my notes from when we did that workshop. Like some of the stuff you've said today, I was like, yep, I know exactly what you're talking about there. Yep, I remember that. So very lucky to have been part of that and take those lessons onwards. So for anyone that hasn't the benefit of you coming into their organization and doing these incredible workshops, is there a couple of little practical tips that you can give our listeners now that can help them on their journey? I mean, they should just call you, but
Yeah, I mean, the book is filled with, it's 120 tips on how to let shit go and find more peace and happiness in the everyday. Sometimes I tell people, you don't even have to read it cover to cover. Just open a tip and implementing it, right? I would say in terms of practicality, when we notice that chatty mind is going, and we use the observing mind to acknowledge it. And it was Eckhart Tolle that said, the moment you realize you're not present, you're present. So getting into that moment, I'll share too that there was a woman by the name of Linda Stone who coined the term email apnea. And she said, we have come to a place where when we check our emails, we are now so stress that we suspend our breathing.
Wow.
It's the whole saber-toothed tiger thing, right? Like
Yeah,
back
yeah, yeah.
chased by, now it's email.
Yeah, yeah,
Now
wow.
our sympathetic nervous system is just constantly activated. When that happens, a couple of practical things you can do is just take a few deep breaths to reset. And I know it's so overstated, just take a few deep breaths, but I sit with corporations and we actually do learn how to breathe because we've forgotten how to breathe. We breathe from our chest level. If you look at infants or toddlers, they're breathing from their diaphragm. You can see their little bellies going in and out. And the more negative emotion, if you will, so the more panic, the more worried, the more angry, what happens to our breathing? Right? Becomes more and more shallow. And so going back to taking those deep breaths and all the way down, and I have people put their hands on their belly and feel it inflate and deflate is such an important thing. It actually physiologically shifts things in your system, your nervous system. And it's a really powerful tool. So some of my clients now start meetings with 3 breaths just to kind of leave the last meeting and let's put our phones away and let's put the distractions away. And again, such an efficient conversation that happens when you're mindful and you're focused and you're mindfully listening. Another thing you can do is what they call the grounding technique. And people who struggle with panic attacks or anxiety attacks might be familiar with this. You acutely lean into your senses. So what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I touching? And from there you get into the moment. The other practical thing, the third tip I'll give is when I came back from the monastery, one of my teachers was visiting Toronto and I said to him, this whole being mindful thing in the real world does not work. It's one thing when you're walking the redwoods with monks and, you're studying ancient scriptures and I'm like, now I have a mortgage and a job and how do you be mindful here? Just to know that you can run off and live in an ashram for a year, but your mind will go with you. So unless you use the right? Just physically taking yourself somewhere else sometimes doesn't do the trick. He said to me, he smiled at me and gave me a very practical answer. And he said, start by speaking out loud what you're doing, because mindfulness is the process of being where you are mentally equaling being where you are physically. Because so often we are physically doing things, we're cooking or we're doing laundry or we're sitting in a meeting, but we're mentally somewhere else, right? And so he said, start by speaking out loud what you're doing. So he gave me the example of, let's say you're doing the dishes, your dialogue is going to sound like this. Now I'm putting soap on the sponge. Now I'm making circular motions on this pot. Now I'm putting it on the drying rack. And you learn how to be in the here and now. And in 15 minutes of doing the dishes, your mind might run off 30 times. This is what the chatty mind does. You build that muscle. The observing mind is like a muscle. The more we use it, the more we lean into it, the more it's going to automatically pop up and be like, nope. And so if you start, and you can do this grocery shopping. Now I'm picking up a banana. Now I'm opening this bag. And again, it takes practice, but it just trains your mind to just be in the here and now. So there's a couple practical tips when it comes to mindfulness, but when our minds are wandering, those are a couple of things you can do to get centered.
I didn't even clock I was doing it purposefully, but before I do every podcast, I literally close my eyes and I just breathe and do really deep breaths just to try and center myself and trying to concentrate and try and get rid of all the distractions. Because I really liked when you came and talked to us, you were talking about mindful and mindful.
Yeah.
So how to get your mind less full and be present and to really be in the moment. I just thought was such a beautiful mindful versus mindful.
I can't believe how much you remember, Laura. I feel like that was like 4 years ago. That's incredible.
It was. I mean, gosh, I wonder how. Yeah, it would have been at least 5 years ago. But this is the thing, though. Your story is such a deeply moving one that you lean in and you listen because you're like, wow, if someone can get over such grief and such pain and such trauma and turn up and be so present and be so warm and friendly and positive and inspiring, you're like, wow. So it was inspiring. And because of that, you are deeply present. When someone tells a story that is so vulnerable and so raw, you are more present and you listen more deeply. So I probably listened more deeply in that workshop than I've listened in any others because I was like, I'm so invested in this story and this movement that you're creating. So thank you. And I do remember because it was powerful.
I so appreciate that, because it's hard to be vulnerable sometimes, especially with that level of intensity and trauma. And I so appreciate you sharing that because it just makes me feel like it's worth it. So thank you. I appreciate that. And I will say too that meditation really helps you become intimate with what's going on in the mind. People say oh, Nina, I can't meditate. I say, why? This is the number one thing I get, because my thoughts won't stop. And I say, that is the role of the chatty mind. Your thoughts are never going to stop. And I've been meditating for 18 years now, and I have never had a meditation where there's been no thought. They might be fewer and further between, but this is the role of the chatty mind. And so when you're sitting in meditation, again, it goes back to that quiet, and suddenly things pop up and that we don't even realize we've been holding. And so you learn the skill of chatty mind, observing mind. And I often have some nature examples of, it's like you are the depths of the ocean and your thoughts are just the waves on top, right? They come from the ocean and then they merge back, and sometimes they're tsunami like, and sometimes they're little bubbly waves, and sometimes they're full of seaweed. But to just let your thoughts come and don't resist them, but also let them go. Or you can picture yourself as the ever-present sky and your thoughts are just clouds. Sometimes I see each thought in a little cloud bubble, and it's like, okay, it's there. Yep, I see you. And then you just let it keep going. And so if you can master that, so to speak, in meditation, then when you're in the real world and when you're in the moment, it's easy to be like, oh, there it is. All right. Okay. Let it come and then let it go. We're not going to do this today. It's a practice, but it's a really, really important to build that awareness muscle. What's going on in there.
And I was going to say, that is why they probably call it a practice, because it's not just a turn it on, turn it off. Okay, I'm done now. It's something that you have to bring into your daily life. And you said meditate before you enter the world, which is such a beautiful thought. And I'm guilty of forgetting to do that, and you get busy and you forget and you make excuses, but it's a beautiful thought. We're all very guilty of waking up and looking at our phone straight away, and all of a sudden your chatty mind has started, right? Because you've let it. So
Exactly.
I need to do more of that for sure.
Yeah. When I do my Tech Zen workshops, one of the practical tips I have, I mean, that one's filled with practical tips, but don't look at your phone half an hour after you wake up, and don't look at your phone half an hour before bed. I think it was Jay Shetty that said scrolling TikTok or Instagram right before bed is like having 100 people come into your bedroom, tell you their opinion and leave.
You're like, get out.
No way. It's just too much on the brain, not to mention light and all how other things affect us. But we're so impacted and influenced by external, then we lose that voice. I actually just read Wishes Fulfilled by Dr. Wayne Dyer, and he talked about how the 5 minutes before you go to bed are so critical, because you basically manifest in your dreams for the next hours. And so now I'm so aware of like 5 minutes before bed, what am I grateful for? What do I want to create? This world is built on love and joy, instead of most of us go to bed, and me too, right? With the anxieties and the worries. So instead of just falling into those old patterns, how do we shift our thinking and create something new? And it takes work. And you know, that whole saying of, it's easy when you're around someone negative, it's easier to get pulled down than people. So it does take effort to have a positive mindset and shift from there.
I could talk to you for hours, like
talking for 5 minutes.
I know, it literally feels like 5 minutes. I looked at the clock and was like, oh my gosh. So we are calling our wonderful guests like yourself wave makers, because all of our guests are creating incredible waves in organizations, in society, in culture, and on people. And so thank you for that. What advice would you give to aspiring wave makers? So maybe someone looking to lean into purpose or live a life more meaningfully. What advice would you give?
Wow. I would say, we were actually talking about this before we started the recording of the podcast, of the Sanskrit word dharma. The dharma is the essence of something. So the dharma of the sun is its heat. The dharma of ice is water. So that thing couldn't be its thing without the dharma of it. And we all have a dharma. We all have a purpose. And before we try to say the practical of, I want to do coaching, or I want to start an app, what's your purpose? Why? What's your why? What's the drive? What sets your soul on fire? What's the passion behind it? I would do this work even if I didn't get paid for it. This is what I feel like I'm meant to do. So going back to that source of, what am I put here to do? Am I put here to be a musician? Am I put here to be an artist? And I know there's practicalities with that, but it's leaning into, why am I here? And intuitively, we can answer that question. We know what that is. Go from that place and watch the magic unfold.
Beautiful. So purpose and the why, and living that, I think that's wonderful. Nina, thank you so much for your truth and your stories with such warmth and such grace, as always. Your ripple moments remind us that healing and presence and courage are not just personal acts, but powerful catalysts for others too. And you're doing that through your work on a one-on-one coaching basis, and through the work you're doing with corporates, and of course with the children that you're supporting going through grief. So incredible stories, as always, from loss to light and from pain to purpose, you are an inspiration, and you show that you can really heal and create incredible waves on the world. So thank you deeply for being part of the journey. I actually feel really emotional. Sorry.
Goodness, I'm so grateful. Thank you, Laura. I'm so grateful for this conversation, and thank you for finding your dharma and having a ripple effect for so many other people. It's just really, really powerful work. So I hope you're giving yourself a pat on
Yeah,
that.
thank you. And it's these human stories that really give me joy and passion, really understanding people and what makes them tick and what drives them and what impact that they then have in the world. So your story is such a beautiful one. So thank you so much for being part of it. It's been amazing. And that is a wrap on this rather emotional episode of The Ripple Impact. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and share along. I'm Laura Barber. This is The Ripple Impact. I will see you next week for more inspiring wavemaker stories. Bye for now. Nina, thank you so much. It's been incredible as always. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the listeners as well.